The woman who stepped off the train in Fort Smith, Arkansas, on a scorching July afternoon in 1878, carried nothing but the tattered dress on her back, and a hollow expression that spoke of a mind stripped bare of memory, identity, and hope. She stood on the wooden platform as the locomotive hissed and groaned, spewing steam into the thick summer air, and she blinked slowly at the unfamiliar world around her. The conductor had found her wandering in one of the passenger cars 3 stops back, unable to tell him her name, where she was going, or where she had come from. He had let her ride to the end of the line, partly out of pity and partly because he had no idea what else to do with a young woman who seemed to have lost every piece of herself, except the ability to breathe. The platform cleared quickly. Passengers reunited with waiting families, merchants loaded their goods onto wagons, and within minutes, the woman stood alone in the oppressive heat. She looked down at her hands, turning them over as if they belonged to someone else. Her fingers were slender, unmarked by hard labor, and her skin was pale despite the sun. She wore no wedding ring. She touched her face, feeling the contours of her cheekbones, her nose, her lips, searching for some spark of recognition that never came. A man watched her from the shade of the station house. He had been waiting for a shipment of barbed wire that had not arrived, and now he leaned against the rough wooden wall, his hat pulled low against the glare. Ryder Brennan was 30 years old, tall and lean from years of ranch work, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He had kind eyes, though they often carried a sadness that came from too much solitude and too many silent nights alone on the range. He had noticed the woman immediately. It was impossible not to. She moved like a ghost, drifting rather than walking, and the confusion on her face was so profound it made his chest tighten. When the last of the crowd dispersed and she remained standing there, swaying slightly in the heat, he pushed off from the wall and approached her slowly, the way he would approach a spooked horse. "Miss," he said gently, stopping a respectful distance away. "You all right?" She turned to look at him, and her eyes were the color of spring leaves, bright and clear despite the fog of confusion that clouded them. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Instead, her brow furrowed and she shook her head slowly. "You got someone meeting you?" Ryder asked, though he already suspected the answer, another headshake. Her breathing quickened, and he could see panic beginning to rise in her chest. "Hey now," he said, his voice low and steady. "It is all right, just take a breath." He waited while she did, watching the rapid rise and fall of her shoulders gradually slow. "Do you know your name?" She stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head again. A single tear traced down her cheek, and she wiped it away with trembling fingers. Ryder removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, thinking. Fort Smith was not a large town, but it sat at the edge of Indian Territory and saw all manner of travelers passing through. Outlaws, prospectors, families heading west, all of them with stories and most of them with secrets. But a young woman alone with no memory and no belongings, that was something different. "You hungry?" he asked. She considered this, then nodded. "Come on, then." He gestured toward the main street. "Let us get you some food and figure out what to do." She hesitated, studying his face with those sharp green eyes, weighing whether to trust this stranger. Ryder understood. He kept his expression open, non-threatening, and after a moment she took a tentative step toward him. They walked together down the dusty street, past the general store and the saloon, toward a small restaurant that served decent stew and bread. Inside, Ryder guided her to a table near the window and ordered food for both of them. The proprietor, a heavy-set woman named Mrs. Hutchins, gave the young woman's disheveled appearance a sharp look but said nothing. When the food arrived, The woman ate slowly, methodically, as if the act of eating was something she had to remember how to do. "I am Ryder Brennan," he said between bites. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles north of here. Raise cattle mostly, some horses." He paused. "You understand what I am saying?" "Yes," she whispered, and her voice was hoarse from disuse. "I understand the words, I just do not know anything else." "The conductor said you do not remember getting on the train." "I do not remember anything before waking up in that car." Her hands gripped the edge of the table. "I do not know my name. I do not know if I have family. I do not know if someone is looking for me or if anyone cares that I am gone. It is all just empty." The desperation in her voice cut through him. Ryder had known loss, had felt the ache of loneliness, but he could not imagine the terror of losing yourself entirely. He set down his spoon and met her eyes. "All right," he said. "Here is what we are going to do. First, we need to give you a name, something to call you until we figure out who you really are." She blinked at him. "Give me a name." "Well, we cannot just keep calling you Miss or you, can we?" He thought for a moment, watching the way the afternoon light caught in her auburn hair. "How about Violet? Violet Sullivan, that sound all right to you?" She tested the name silently, her lips forming the syllables. "Violet Sullivan," she repeated aloud. A faint smile ghosted across her face, the first he had seen. "Yes, that sounds all right. Good." Ryder nodded. "Now, Violet Sullivan, you need a place to stay and a way to support yourself while we work on getting your memory back. I know Doc Fletcher, the town physician. He is a good man and knows about these things. We can talk to him, see if he has any ideas. But in the meantime, you need work." "I do not know what I can do," Violet said quietly. "I do not know if I have any skills." "Everyone has skills," Ryder assured her. "We will figure out what yours are." He considered for a moment. "My ranch, it is just me out there. My mother passed 2 years ago and I have been managing on my own. The house is big, too big for one person, and it could use a woman's touch. Cooking, cleaning, mending, garden work. I could use the help and you would have a safe place to stay. Separate room, of course. Everything proper." Violet studied him carefully. "Why would you do this for me? You do not know me." "No, I do not," Ryder admitted. "But you need help and I can give it. That is reason enough." He leaned back in his chair. "Look, I am not going to lie to you. Life on a ranch is hard work. The days are long and it gets lonely. But you would be safe, fed, and paid fair wages. And maybe being in one place for a while, your memory will come back." She was silent for a long time, and he could see her weighing her options. Finally, she said, "I do not have anywhere else to go." "Then you will come to the ranch," Ryder said, and it was settled. They stopped by Doc Fletcher's office on the way out of town. The doctor was a gray-haired man with spectacles and gentle hands. He examined Violet carefully, asking her questions and checking her pupils, her reflexes, the back of her head for any sign of injury. "No physical trauma that I can find," he said finally. "Sometimes the mind protects itself from something terrible by forgetting. Other times, a fever or illness can cause memory loss. Without knowing what happened to her, it is hard to say." He turned to Violet. "It might come back gradually in pieces, or it might return all at once. There is no way to predict these things." "What should I do?" Violet asked. "Live your life," Doc Fletcher said simply. "Do not try to force it. Let yourself settle somewhere safe and give your mind time to heal. If you start to remember anything, write it down. Even small details might be important." Ryder bought Violet a few essentials from the general store, some practical dresses, undergarments, a brush, and basic toiletries. She accepted each item with a mixture of gratitude and discomfort, unused to being dependent on anyone. They loaded everything into his wagon, and as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they headed north out of Fort Smith. The ranch appeared as they crested a gentle rise, a sprawling homestead nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. The house was built of solid timber, 2 stories with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Barns and outbuildings dotted the property, and cattle grazed in distant pastures. It was beautiful in a rugged, untamed way, and Violet felt something stir in her chest, though she could not name what it was. Ryder showed her to a bedroom on the 2nd floor, simply furnished with a bed, a dresser, and a washstand. "It was my mother's room," he said. "I have not changed anything since she passed. You can make it your own if you like." "It is perfect," Violet said softly. "Thank you." He left her to settle in, and she sat on the edge of the bed, running her hands over the patchwork quilt. The fabric was soft from years of use, and she wondered about the woman who had made it, the mother Ryder had loved and lost. She wondered if she herself had a mother somewhere, worrying, searching. The thought brought fresh tears, and she let them fall, alone in the quiet room. The first weeks on the ranch passed in a blur of discovery. Violet learned that her hands knew how to knead bread dough, how to mend a torn shirt with neat, even stitches, how to coax stubborn vegetables from the garden soil. She learned that she liked the early mornings best, when the air was still cool and the world felt new. She learned that Ryder was a man of few words but great kindness, that he worked from dawn until dusk without complaint, and that he carried a loneliness that matched her own. They fell into an easy rhythm. She would wake before sunrise and prepare breakfast while he tended to the animals. They would eat together, usually in comfortable silence, and then he would head out to work the ranch while she managed the house. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set, sometimes talking, sometimes not. Ryder told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father who had died in the war and his mother who had held everything together with sheer force of will. Violet listened, hungry for stories, for connections, for anything to fill the void where her own history should have been. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Ryder came in from the pasture with a deep gash on his forearm. He had caught it on a piece of broken fence wire, and blood soaked through his shirt sleeve. "Sit down," Violet commanded, her voice sharp with concern. She fetched clean water and bandages, then carefully cleaned the wound. Her fingers were steady and sure, and as she worked, something flickered at the edge of her memory. The smell of carbolic acid, the feel of bandages, a sense of purpose. "Have you done this before?" Ryder asked, watching her face. "I think so," she murmured. "It feels familiar." She finished wrapping his arm and sat back. "Maybe I was a nurse or helped care for someone who was ill." "That is good," Ryder said. "That is something." Small memories began to surface after that, fragments that did not quite form a complete picture. She remembered the sound of a piano, though she did not know if she had played it or simply listened. She remembered the scent of roses and the feeling of silk against her skin. She remembered fear, deep and visceral, though she could not remember what had caused it. Summer turned to autumn, and the work on the ranch shifted with the seasons. Ryder brought in extra hands to help with the fall roundup, and Violet found herself cooking for a small crew of cowboys. They were rough men, weathered and hard living, but they treated her with respect, tipping their hats and thanking her for every meal. She noticed how they deferred to Ryder, how they looked to him for decisions and followed his lead without question. He was a natural leader, confident and capable, and she found herself watching him more than she should. It was not just his competence that drew her attention. It was the way he moved, economical and graceful despite his size. It was the rare smile that transformed his face from handsome to devastating. It was the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention, with an expression she could not quite read, but that made her heart beat faster. One crisp October morning, Violet was hanging laundry on the line when a rattlesnake slithered into the yard. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The snake coiled, its rattle buzzing a warning, and she knew she was too far from the house to reach safety before it struck. "Do not move." Ryder's voice came from behind her, low and calm. She heard his footsteps, slow and measured, and then the sharp crack of a shovel striking the ground. The snake's head separated from its body, and the rattling stopped. Violet's knees buckled and Ryder caught her, his arms strong and steady around her waist. "I have got you," he murmured against her hair. "You are safe." She turned in his arms, her face pressed against his chest, and let herself lean into his strength. His heart beat strong and steady beneath her cheek, and his arms tightened around her. They stood like that for a long moment, neither of them speaking, and Violet realized with sudden clarity that she had fallen in love with this man who had given her a name and a place in the world. When she finally pulled back, Ryder's eyes were dark and intense. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with infinite gentleness. "Violet," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "Ryder," she whispered back, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he lowered his head and kissed her. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet, as if he was afraid she might break. But Violet pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt, and kissed him back with all the longing that had been building for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I have wanted you to," Violet said, and smiled at the surprise on his face. They talked that night, really talked, sitting together on the porch as the stars wheeled overhead. Ryder told her things he had never told anyone, about how alone he had felt since his mother died, about his fear that he would spend his whole life working this ranch with no one to share it with. Violet told him about the frustration of being trapped in a present with no past, of building a life on foundations she could not see. "What if I remember?" she asked quietly. "What if I have a husband somewhere, or a family looking for me?" "Then we will deal with it when it happens," Ryder said firmly. "But right now, in this moment, you are Violet Sullivan and I love you. That is real even if nothing else is." Tears spilled down her cheeks and she kissed him again, harder this time, trying to pour everything she felt into the press of lips and the tangle of tongues. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her onto his lap, and she went willingly, her fingers threading through his hair. They stayed like that until the night grew cold, holding each other, kissing each other, afraid to let go. The next morning, Ryder rode into Fort Smith to speak with Judge Parker, the famous hanging judge who presided over the federal court there. If anyone could help track down Violet's true identity, it would be someone with access to records and resources beyond what a small town could provide. But he returned that evening shaking his head. Parker said he would keep an eye out, send inquiries to other jurisdictions, but without more information there is not much he can do, Ryder reported. "There have been no reports of missing women matching your description, no families searching for anyone who fits. It is like you appeared out of thin air." Violet nodded slowly. Part of her was disappointed, but another part, a part she was almost ashamed to acknowledge, felt relieved. Every day that passed without answers was another day she could spend as Violet Sullivan, another day she could spend with Ryder. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the north with bitter winds and heavy snow. The ranch work became harder, more dangerous, and Violet found herself worrying every time Ryder went out into the cold. She would watch from the window as he trudged through snowdrifts to check on the cattle, her heart in her throat until he returned safely. One particularly brutal night in January, a blizzard rolled in with little warning. Ryder had been out mending a fence when the snow began to fall, and by the time he made it back to the house, he was half frozen. Violet stripped off his icy clothes, wrapped him in blankets, and made him sit by the fire while she prepared hot coffee and soup. His hands were clumsy with cold, so she held the mug to his lips, making him drink. "You could have died out there," she said, and her voice shook. "I am all right," Ryder assured her, but his teeth chattered. "You are not all right. You are freezing and stubborn, and you take too many risks." She set down the mug and grabbed his hands, rubbing them between hers to warm them. "What would I do if something happened to you?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw the same fear reflected in his eyes. "What would I do if something happened to you?" he countered. "Violet, I cannot lose you. I know we have not known each other long, and I know you might remember something that changes everything, but I do not care. I want you in my life now and always." "I want that too," Violet said fiercely. "I love you, Ryder. I do not remember my past, but I know this is real. What I feel for you is real." He pulled her close, and they sat together by the fire, wrapped in blankets, warming each other. That night, when the storm raged outside and the house creaked under the weight of snow and wind, Violet climbed into Ryder's bed. They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies with reverent hands and whispered words. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, like coming home, and afterward, as Violet lay in Ryder's arms listening to his steady heartbeat, she knew she had found where she belonged. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Calves were born, foals wobbled on spindly legs, and the garden burst into bloom. Violet worked alongside Ryder, her hands growing calloused and strong, her skin taking on a healthy glow from hours in the sun. She was not the same lost woman who had stepped off the train 9 months ago. She was confident now, capable, and deeply in love. In late April, on a warm afternoon with wildflowers blooming across the valley, Ryder proposed. He did not have a ring, but he offered her his mother's instead, a simple gold band with a small sapphire. Violet said yes before he even finished asking, and they were married in Fort Smith the following week, with Doc Fletcher and Mrs. Hutchins standing as witnesses. The wedding night was different from all the nights before. This time there was no hesitation, no shadow of uncertainty. They belonged to each other completely in the eyes of God and the law, and they celebrated that belonging with passion and joy. Afterward, lying tangled together in the moonlight, Violet traced patterns on Ryder's chest and wondered if she had ever been this happy in whatever life she had lived before. "You still want to know?" Ryder asked softly, reading her thoughts. "About who you were?" Violet considered the question. "I do," she said finally. "Not because I want to go back to that life, but because I want to understand what brought me here. I want to know if there are people out there who need to know I am safe." "That is fair," Ryder said. He kissed the top of her head. "We will keep looking. But no matter what we find, you are Violet Brennan now, my wife. That does not change." "That does not change," Violet agreed. Summer returned, completing the cycle of seasons, and with it came a stranger to Fort Smith. He was a private detective from St. Louis, hired by a wealthy family to track down their missing daughter. Her name was Victoria Sinclair, and she had disappeared from a train bound for San Francisco over a year ago. The family had reason to believe she had gotten off somewhere in Arkansas or Indian Territory, and they had spent months following cold leads and dead ends. When the detective showed Doc Fletcher a photograph of Victoria Sinclair, the doctor's eyes widened. He sent word to the ranch immediately, and Ryder and Violet made the journey into town, both of them silent with dread. The detective, a thin man with sharp eyes named Mr. Carlyle, laid out the photograph on Doc Fletcher's desk. Violet stared at it, her heart pounding. The woman in the picture was younger, softer, dressed in expensive clothes with her hair elaborately styled, but there was no mistaking the face. It was her own. "This is you, is it not?" Mr. Carlyle said, though it was not really a question. "Yes," Violet whispered. "I think it is." The story came out slowly, pieced together from Mr. Carlyle's investigation and the fragments of memory that now rushed back in a flood. Victoria Sinclair had been the daughter of a shipping magnate, raised in luxury and promised in marriage to a man twice her age, a business associate of her father's. She had not wanted the marriage, had begged her father to release her from the engagement, but he had refused. So she had run. She had boarded a train heading west, planning to disappear into California and start a new life. But somewhere along the journey, she had fallen ill, a violent fever that left her delirious. By the time the fever broke, her memory was gone, and she had ended up wandering through the train until the conductor found her. "Your father wants you home," Mr. Carlyle said. "He has been very worried." "And the engagement?" Violet asked, though she already knew the answer, still intact. "Your intended has been most patient, waiting for your return." Ryder's hand tightened around hers. "She is not going back," he said, his voice hard. Mr. Carlyle raised an eyebrow. "She is legally bound to her family until she marries or reaches the age of majority, which in her case was 21. How old are you now, Miss Sinclair?" 22, Violet said. The number came to her clearly, along with a rush of other details. She remembered her birthday, her mother's face, the sound of her father's voice raised in anger. "I turned 22 last November." "Then you are a legal adult and can make your own choices," Mr. Carlyle said, "though your father will not be pleased." "I do not care," Violet said, and she meant it. "I am not Victoria Sinclair anymore. I am Violet Brennan. This is my home and Ryder is my husband. I am not going back to St. Louis, and I am certainly not marrying some old man I do not love." Mr. Carlyle studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I will inform your family of your decision. They may try to contact you directly." "Let them try," Ryder said. "My wife has made her choice." The detective left the next day, and Violet waited for the relief she thought she would feel. Instead, she felt unsettled, as if a ghost had reached out from her past and brushed cold fingers against her present. That night, she dreamed of her childhood home, of her mother's gentle hands and her father's stern face, of a younger brother she had loved and left behind. She woke crying, and Ryder held her until the tears subsided. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Staying?" "No," Violet said fiercely. "Never. But I wish I could see my mother again, let her know I am safe. And my brother, he was only 10 when I left. He probably thinks I am dead." "Then write to them," Ryder suggested. "You do not have to go back to have a relationship with them." So Violet wrote letters, long ones, explaining everything that had happened. She wrote to her mother, to her brother, even to her father, though that letter was shorter and colder. She told them about Ryder, about the ranch, about the life she had built from nothing. She asked for their understanding, though she did not beg for it. She was Violet Brennan now, and she would not apologize for that. The responses came slowly. Her mother's letter was full of tears and gratitude, expressing relief that Victoria was alive and well, even if she had chosen a different path. She sent her blessings and a request to meet her son-in-law someday. Her brother's letter was full of questions and excitement, and Violet laughed and cried as she read his enthusiastic scrawl. Her father's response was terse and angry, disowning her for breaking the engagement and shaming the family. Violet folded that letter away and decided she could live with his disapproval. Life on the ranch continued, richer now for the knowledge of where she had come from, but unchanged in the ways that mattered. Violet was still Violet, still the woman who woke before dawn to make coffee, still the woman who stood on the porch at sunset watching for Ryder's return. She was also Victoria, the girl who had run away from a gilded cage, but that girl felt like a character in a story rather than a living, breathing part of herself. In the fall, Violet discovered she was pregnant. She told Ryder one evening as they sat together after supper, and the joy on his face made her heart swell. He placed his hand on her still flat stomach with such reverence, such wonder, that she fell in love with him all over again. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Violet asked, though she could see the answer written all over him. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Ryder said. He pulled her into his arms and held her close. "You have given me everything, Violet. A home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," Violet whispered against his chest. "More than I can say." The pregnancy was not easy. Violet suffered from sickness that lasted well into the second trimester, and her body ached in ways she had not anticipated. But Ryder was attentive and gentle, taking over more of the household work, rubbing her feet when they swelled, holding her hair when she was ill. Doc Fletcher checked on her regularly, pronouncing her healthy despite the discomfort and predicting a spring birth. Winter was long and difficult, but they survived it together, huddled by the fire, planning for the future. They talked about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about expanding the ranch so their child would have something solid to inherit. Ryder was building a cradle in his spare time, carving intricate designs into the wood with patient, careful hands. In March, as the first green shoots pushed through the thawing earth, Violet's water broke. The labor was long and painful, lasting through the night and into the next day. Ryder stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering words of encouragement and love. Doc Fletcher coached her through the contractions, and finally, as the sun reached its zenith, a baby's cry split the air. "A boy," Doc Fletcher announced, laying the squalling infant on Violet's chest. "A healthy baby boy." Violet looked down at her son, at his red, wrinkled face and tiny fists, and felt a love so profound it took her breath away. Ryder leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears, and kissed first her forehead and then the baby's. "What should we call him?" Violet asked. Ryder thought for a moment, then smiled. James Brennan, after my father, James," Violet repeated, testing the name. The baby quieted at the sound of her voice, his dark eyes blinking up at her. "Hello, James. Welcome to the world." The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Violet learned to nurse, to change diapers, to interpret the different cries that meant hunger or tiredness or discomfort. Ryder learned to function on little sleep, to rock the baby while Violet rested, to marvel at the tiny fingers that gripped his own with surprising strength. They moved through those early days in a fog of exhaustion and joy, falling more deeply in love with each other and with their son. As James grew, he became the center of their world. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, and he had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Violet would sit on the porch with him, pointing out the cattle and horses, telling him stories about the ranch. Ryder would carry him out to the barn, showing him the animals, letting him touch the soft nose of a gentle mare. When James was 6 months old, Violet's mother came to visit. She arrived in a private carriage, looking elegant and out of place in her expensive traveling clothes, but her face lit up when she saw Violet standing in the doorway with the baby in her arms. "Victoria," she breathed, and then corrected herself. "Violet. Oh, my dear girl." They embraced, both of them crying, and then Violet's mother held her grandson for the first time. The older woman's face softened with love, and she looked up at Violet with shining eyes. "He is beautiful. You are beautiful. And this place, this life you have built, it suits you." Over the course of the week-long visit, Violet showed her mother everything: the house, the ranch, the town of Fort Smith. She introduced her to Ryder properly and watched with satisfaction as her mother came to appreciate the man her daughter had married. He was not the wealthy businessman her father had chosen, but he was good and kind and strong, and he loved Violet with a devotion that was impossible to miss. On the last evening of the visit, as they sat together watching the sunset, Violet's mother took her hand. "I want you to know that I understand why you ran," she said quietly. "I should have fought harder for you, should have stood up to your father. I am sorry I did not." "It brought me here," Violet said, squeezing her mother's hand. "I cannot regret that." "No," her mother agreed. "Neither can I. You are happy, truly happy, and that is all I ever wanted for you." They promised to write often, to visit when possible, and when the carriage pulled away, Violet felt at peace. She had reclaimed a piece of her past without sacrificing her present, and that felt like its own kind of miracle. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and small joys. James grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who followed his father everywhere and loved the ranch with the same passion Ryder did. When he was 3, Violet became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier, as if her body remembered what to do. She gave birth to a daughter in the winter, a tiny, perfect girl they named Eleanor after Ryder's mother. Eleanor was different from James, quieter, more thoughtful, with a stubborn streak that reminded Violet of herself. She loved books and flowers and would sit for hours watching the clouds drift across the sky. Ryder adored her, and Violet often found him reading to her in the evenings, his deep voice spinning stories that made Eleanor's eyes go wide with wonder. The ranch prospered. Ryder expanded the herds, hired reliable men to help with the work, and earned a reputation as a fair and honest dealer. Violet managed the household and the accounts, her head for numbers proving invaluable. Together, they built something solid and lasting, a legacy for their children and their children's children. When James was 10 and Eleanor was 7, Violet's younger brother came to visit. He was 18 now, a young man finishing his education, and he was full of questions about the West and the ranch life. Ryder took him under his wing, teaching him to ride and rope, and by the end of the summer the boy was talking about moving west permanently. Violet was thrilled at the prospect of having family nearby, and when he returned the following year to work on the ranch, it felt like another piece of her life clicking into place. There were hard times, too. A drought one year that killed half the herd and nearly broke them financially. A winter so cold that pipes froze and animals died despite their best efforts. A day when James was thrown from a horse and broke his arm, and Violet thought her heart would stop from fear. But they weathered every storm together, Ryder and Violet, their love the anchor that held everything else in place. On their 10th anniversary, Ryder surprised Violet with a trip to St. Louis. He had been planning it for months, saving money, arranging for her brother to manage the ranch in their absence. They left the children with Violet's mother and spent a week in the city, seeing the sights, eating in fancy restaurants, staying in a hotel room with silk sheets and hot running water. One evening, as they dressed for the theater, Violet caught Ryder watching her in the mirror. "What?" she asked, smiling. "I was just thinking about the day I found you on that train platform," Ryder said. "You were so lost, so scared, and now look at you." He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You are the strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. I am the luckiest man alive." Violet turned in his arms and kissed him deeply. "You gave me a name and a purpose," she said. "You gave me a life worth living. I am the lucky one." They made love that night with the city lights glittering outside the window, and it was as passionate and intense as it had been that first winter night. 10 years of marriage had not dulled the desire between them, only deepened it, adding layers of intimacy and trust that made every touch more meaningful. When they returned to the ranch, it was like coming home to themselves. James and Alina ran out to meet them, both talking over each other in their excitement to share everything that had happened while their parents were gone. Violet scooped them both into her arms, breathing in the sweet smell of their hair, and felt a contentment so complete it was almost overwhelming. More years passed, measured in birthdays and harvests and small triumphs. James grew tall and strong, a young man who could outwork most of the hands despite being only 16. Alina developed a talent for drawing, filling sketchbook after sketchbook with images of the ranch, the animals, her family. Violet watched her children grow with pride and a touch of melancholy, knowing that soon they would be forging their own paths in the world. When Violet was 40, she and Ryder became grandparents. James married a sweet girl from town, a schoolteacher named Sarah, and within a year they had a son of their own. Holding that baby, seeing her son become a father, Violet was struck by how far she had come from that empty-eyed woman on the train platform. She had a history now, a story that stretched forward and back, connecting her to the past and the future in ways that felt solid and real. Alina announced her engagement the following year to a young lawyer who had moved to Fort Smith to set up practice. The wedding was a grand affair by ranch standards, with half the town in attendance, and Violet cried happy tears as she watched her daughter marry a man who clearly adored her. Ryder squeezed her hand during the ceremony, and when she looked at him, she saw the same emotion reflected in his eyes. They had built this family, this love together. The ranch continued to thrive. James took over more of the day-to-day operations, implementing new techniques and ideas, while Ryder transitioned into an advisory role. He and Violet spent more time together, taking long rides across the property, sitting on the porch in the evenings, simply enjoying each other's company. They had earned this quiet time, this peace, and they savored it. On a warm summer evening, when Violet was 55 and Ryder was 57, they sat together on that same porch where they had shared their first kiss. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, and the valley was alive with the sounds of insects and birds settling in for the night. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, 4 of them now, shrieking with laughter as they chased fireflies. "You ever think about that day?" Ryder asked, watching the children. "The day you got off the train." "Sometimes," Violet admitted. "It feels like a different lifetime, like it happened to someone else. But I am glad it happened. I am glad I lost my memory, as strange as that sounds, because if I had not, I would never have found you." "I think we would have found each other anyway," Ryder said. "Maybe not in this life, but somehow, somewhere. We were meant to be together." Violet leaned her head on his shoulder. "That is a nice thought." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon and the stars begin to emerge. One of the grandchildren, a little girl with Alina's thoughtful eyes, ran up to the porch. "Grandma, Grandpa, come catch fireflies with us," she demanded, tugging on Ryder's hand. Ryder laughed and stood, pulling Violet up with him. "How can we say no to that?" They joined their grandchildren in the yard, running and laughing like children themselves, capturing the glowing insects in cupped hands and releasing them back into the night. Violet caught Ryder's eye across the yard, and the love she saw there was as strong as it had been that first day, tempered by years and deepened by shared experience. Later, after the grandchildren had been taken home and the house was quiet, Violet and Ryder lay together in their bed. The window was open, letting in the cool night breeze, and moonlight spilled across the floor. "I love you," Violet said into the darkness. "I have loved you from almost the moment I met you, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Ryder said, pulling her close. "You are my heart, Violet Brennan. You always have been, and you always will be." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and Violet dreamed of trains and empty platforms and a cowboy with kind eyes who had given her everything she needed to become whole. The years continued their march, as years do. Ryder's hair turned silver, and Violet's auburn locks gained threads of white. They moved more slowly, their bodies bearing the marks of lives well lived and hard work done, but the love between them never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, a constant in a changing world. James and Sarah gave them more grandchildren, and Alina and her husband added 3 more. The ranch house was often filled with the sound of children, and Violet delighted in each one, learning their personalities, watching them grow. Ryder built a swing set in the yard and spent hours pushing squealing grandchildren higher and higher. His face creased with joy. On Violet's 70th birthday, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, filled the house and spilled out onto the lawn. There was music and dancing and so much food that the tables groaned under the weight of it. Violet moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and well wishes, feeling overwhelmed by the abundance of love surrounding her. At one point, she found herself standing apart from the celebration, looking out over the valley that had been her home for more than 50 years. Ryder came up beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Violet said. "I could have died on that train platform, lost and alone. Instead, I found you and you gave me all of this." She gestured to the party, the ranch, the life they had built. "You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Ryder corrected gently. "I was just as lost as you were, Violet. I just did not realize it until you stepped off that train." She turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. His fingers were gnarled now with arthritis, his palms still calloused from years of work. They were the hands that had held her through every joy and sorrow, that had built their home, raised their children, loved her without reservation. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing me when I could not see myself, for giving me a name and a purpose and a reason to live." "Thank you," Ryder echoed, "for letting me love you, for building this life with me, for being my partner in everything." They kissed there, in front of God and their family, and the land that had witnessed their love story from the beginning. And when they pulled apart, there were tears on both their faces, but they were tears of joy and gratitude, and a love that had transcended time and memory, and every obstacle life had thrown their way. The party continued into the evening, and Violet and Ryder danced together under the stars, their movements slow but sure, their bodies remembering the rhythm even as age tried to steal it away. Surrounded by family, held in the arms of the man she loved, Violet knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Violet Brennan, who had once been Victoria Sinclair, who had once been a nameless woman with no past and no future, had found her home, and it was good.